A couple of weeks ago, I got a comment on an old video I made about how ultimately there are no good mothers in Bridgerton. Every one of them would be terrible in some form or fashion by modern standards, and although I don't think I could categorize any of them as being particularly good mothers, what they are, however, are mothers who are doing the best they can for their children and trying in their own way to help their children survive and succeed in their world, and that to me is a good thing. Of course, what their children want varies, and what these mothers think is best for their children varies as well. But none of us can deny that they were trying their best. Yes, even Lady Araminta Cowper. However, someone left a comment on that video talking about how Violet's inability to talk to Daphne about sex was a clear case of her failing her daughter, as she sent her unprepared and unequipped with the information she needed as she was getting married. This is what Daphne accuses her mother of. And I made a mental note in a journal I keep with my video ideas to eventually come back around to responding to that comment, and why you all are getting this video now, which is a great time for me to point out that if there are specific topics you want me to address or make a video about on Bridgerton, you can put that request in the comments of my videos. If it's something I'm also interested in covering, I will most likely add it to my journal and get around to making a video on it, give or take a couple of months or maybe a year. Now, I'm sure nobody who is watching Bridgerton is doing so for its historical accuracy. Let's not kid ourselves here. The show is very much a wish fulfillment fantasy, and a lot of historical accuracy is thrown out the window to give us prime entertainment, and I am fine with that. Because you see, the reason why I enjoy Bridgerton and talking about it constantly as we collectively wait for 2026 and news of the exact release date for season 4, when we would once again be lost within the world, is because I really like the characters, thinking about them and their choices and why they make certain decisions. And I like that in thinking about these characters, sometimes I get epiphanies or a better understanding about them that leads to me reconsidering my positions on them. For example, my recent video on Eloise, where I mentioned that for her, given the context of her family, she really isn't selfish. She's simply a Bridgerton whose family has normalized selfishness to the point that it's not really a moral failing, but it's simply just something that they just do. And the same applies for me with regards to the mamas of the ton and their refusal to talk to their daughters about sex, the pleasures to be derived from it, and how it all works out for them with regards to their desires. And this especially so for how they keep it from everyone but their recently married daughters. Because I'm sure it goes without saying that we all know the reason why titled mothers living within Regency England would not be telling their unmarried daughters about sex, right? In an article written for the American conservative, Rod Dreher writes that historian Farames Daboiwala argued that by 1800, almost 40% of brides came to the altar pregnant, and about a quarter of all firstborn children were illegitimate. It was to be a permanent change in behavior. 19th century England was one that was quite unbridled with matters about sex, but only amongst the lower class. The higher up the social strata we go, the less the information young women were given about sex and the less they were allowed to know about their pleasures. Because remember, just a whiff of impropriety was enough to ruin a young woman and all the younger women associated with her via familial ties. Now, I agree wholeheartedly with Mary Wollstonecraft that James Fordyce's sermons to young women is a mess of condescending trash, but his words were considered gospel with how they were meant to police young women and their behaviors. I mean, it's Fordyce that says, the honor and peace of a family are much more dependent on the conduct of daughters than of sons. And one young lady going astray shall subject her relations to such discredit and distress as united good conduct of all her brothers and sisters, supposing numerous, shall scarce ever be able to repair. It's a collective damning from one slip-up that entitled mothers of the time, the mamas of the ton, would never ever want to give room to grow, because even if it is that the young lady hasn't had intercourse with anyone prior to her husband, her acting in any way on her wedding night like she had prior knowledge of the act and what it entails would be counted as a smirch on her virtue. It's why, for example, the minute the news broke about Marina's pregnancy, not only was she shunned, but the other Featherington girls were shunned alongside her, even though they were not the ones who were pregnant. Daughters of the lower class had a larger leeway than daughters of titled families did. Illegitimacy is a big no-no when somebody is meant to inherit a title. It's why Anthony can fuck Sienna against a tree but immediately proposes to Kate the morning after he spends the night with her. Of course, we know he's doing so because he's fallen in love with her, but Anthony doesn't actually use his words. Dumbass. But this video isn't about Anthony. Its focus is on Violet Bridgerton and to some extent Porsha Featherington, two women in the show with married daughters who we see on screen don't give their daughters the information they needed to know before they married. And the important question of, did they fail them in that regard? Because you see, the reason why I brought up the information on what England was like in the 19th century and the restrictions placed on titled young women from titled families was because I need us to be able to fully envision the times in which these two women lived. A patriarchal society that allowed the gentlemen of the ton the leeway to sow their wild oats as they saw fit, as long as when it was time for them to marry, they found decent, respectable women from good families to marry, whilst the young women all had to wait with their pristine reputation, was one that was already rigged against these women. Violet knew that, and Porsha did as well. The power resided not with their daughters but with the men they married, and so the only thing they could do was help their daughters make a good match and hope for the best, with the knowledge that things could either go one of two ways. They could be paired with a man who has no particular fondness for their daughter and simply wants heirs to carry on the family name, in which case their daughter would have to do her duty, and even if her husband doesn't necessarily like her, he at least wouldn't disdain her for being more knowledgeable than what a proper lady should know. The second possibility is that she is paired with a man who likes her, loves her even, and should that be the case, then the opportunity will lie with the husband to teach their daughters the pleasure to be had from the act. Their daughters still maintain their innocence and virtue prior to the wedding, but afterwards, their husband will then be able to teach them all the pleasures to be derived from the act that they can partake in without being judged, because once again, said husband is the one bringing them to all that height of pleasure and teaching them. Like, do I think it's bullshit that a woman's pleasure in Regency England is tied to the man that she marries? Yes, I do. But is that how things worked back then? And is that what Violet and Porsha had to deal with and work with within the world of Bridgerton? Yes, it is. Violet, remember, is working from the perspective that when you marry for love, which is what she did and what she believes Daphne did before Daphne snapped at her for keeping things from her. But as I was saying, Violet is working with the belief that when you marry for love, then everything that follows is all right, because the man you've chosen will be able to meet all your needs and teach you everything you need to know within the comfort and privacy of your marital bed. Like, were there books and pamphlets at the time with full diagrams of the act to teach women what to expect? Yes. Would the first daughter of a viscounty or the eldest daughters of a barony have access to said materials? Of course not. Even with how rebellious Eloise was, she still doesn't get that information and had to learn it from Penelope's maid. And in the books, she learns it from Sophie. Because remember, Sophie was raised as a member of the lower class, hence why she had that access to the information. As far as Violet was concerned, she didn't need to tell Daphne anything because Simon would teach her and show her, and she believes her daughter would like it a lot, like she did. Mama had 8 kids after all, very close in age. Now, we don't have any confirmation of what Porsha and Archibald Featherington's sexual and romantic relationship was like by the time the show starts. She's pretty much fed up with him and they live mostly separate lives beneath the same roof where he does his own thing and she the same. The suggestion she gives Prudence and Philippa makes the act sound perfunctory at most, which makes me think that that is how she eventually started to see sex with her own husband. And that is once again something that is more the responsibility of the girl's husbands as far as she's concerned. You can either be married to somebody who is just bam, bam, give me kids and let's go, or it can be something more pleasurable. To her, she had done her part. Up until having her daughters maintain their innocence and purity before their marriage, her handing them over to her was then up to their husbands picking up the rest of their education as was done with her. In addition, I always read the subtleties of Violet and Porsha's silence as them also wanting to preserve their daughter's innocence for as long as they can. And no, I'm not talking about sexual purity, but just their general innocence, like in general. Young ladies from titled families were pretty much protected, didn't really have much knowledge of things outside of what they were meant to know. It wasn't until they got married and started interacting with the wider world as married women that they started to learn and grow as they lost the innocence. And a part of me wonders if, because marriage to them was growing, it's why Porsha is so frustrated that Prudence and Philippa are still insisting on being tied to her, because for her and Violet, their daughter's marrying is a chance for them to become their own person, to come into their own. The Yorubas would say Ojunwotila, which is usually a phrase that is brought up after your first sexual experience, that your eyes have been opened, that you've eaten from the fruit of knowledge and are now more aware of things, more aware of yourself. You're less easily controlled because that innocence is gone. And I know maybe it is a rich, but a part of me wonders if that isn't something that Violet and Porsha fought hard to keep from happening for as long as they could, until it was time their daughters were sent forth. Of course, this could just be me yapping out of my ass. Maybe I am wrong. But in answer to the question I posited as the title of this video, I don't think that Violet and Porsha failed their daughters. They helped maintain their chastity, kept their virtue, ensured that no aspersion would ever be cast on their daughters for knowing more than they should have, and ultimately gave them the room to go learn on their own terms and become the women they wanted to be, also on their own terms, when they got married. And to me, that doesn't a failure make. But maybe that is just me. Maybe you think something totally different. I would, as always, love to hear your thoughts. Please drop them all in the comments. Like this video if you've watched this far and haven't done so yet. Share this if you want. Support me on Patreon if you can. If you can't, however, do consider checking out my other videos linked in the description bar. One of them is my gaming channel with all my gameplay videos if you would like to watch me play through RPGs using my philosophy of there's no need to rush, just take your time with the story. Or you can check out my ASMR channel if you happen to be one of those who find my voice soothing and love listening to stories on myth and folktales. Whatever rocks your boat. Whichever the case may be, however, I will see you tomorrow with a new video. Until then, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.